just remove these notes, and then I'll export this function at the bottom here using module.exports will be equal to auth. Now we can import our auth middleware function in our todos.js file. I'll come to todo.js, scroll at the top, and I can import it at the top here. So I'll say const auth will be equal to require one step upwards, and then access the middleware folder, and then we access our auth file. Now once we import this auth, remember it's our function, our middleware function, we can use it on our endpoints. And how we will do that is by including it as a parameter at our get method here or post method in any of these CRUD operation methods. So the first parameter will be the path, the second parameter will be our middleware function. So our middleware function is executed before this callback function, and once it's executed, all this process must be varied. So we must have a token, the token must be varied, and then we pass functionality to the next middleware function, which is now our callback function, right here. If that process fails, it means that we won't proceed to getting our to-dos. Now we can test this using Postman. So I'll come to my command prompt here to make sure that server is running, and then open Postman. So the first thing that we need to have is a valid JSON web token, and we'll get that by logging in a user. So I'll perform a post request to localhost 5000/API/sign-in to log in a user, and then at the body of the request we will have an email which is registered already and a password which is valid, and then I'll send this request. So send, and we get a token as the response here. I'll copy this token, and we need to perform a get request to this endpoint, this one here, where we have included auth middleware function here, and see whether we'll be able to access the data. Okay, so back to Postman, I will perform a get request, and we don't need anything at the body of the request, so you can ignore this or delete everything if you have anything here. And when you check at the headers here, you'll see we have key value of our headers, and it's currently empty. So when we perform this request, we should get an error because we are not authorized. Let's see. I'll send this request, and not authorized message comes in, and this is from our middleware function, so it means that it's working. Now we can set a key here, and remember we gave a key of XAuth token, and the value is our token, what we just copied. Okay, so I'll paste it here, and when I perform this request, we should now get our to-dos. I will send, and perfect, we are getting an empty array. This means that we don't have to-dos currently at our database, but we are getting back something. So our token is valid. But what if I mess up with this token? Like maybe I remove the 5 and replace it with another digit. So this is not a valid token. So I will send, and we should get a different error. Invalid token. So our middleware function is working. So that is how we protect our routes. We just include this middleware function with every request. But for now, I want these routes to remain public so that we can first work on our front end, and when we get to working with authentication and authorization on the front end, we will come back and protect our routes, and we will perform a further authorization so that users only get the to-dos that they themselves have created, and also post the to-dos and edit or delete to-dos that they themselves have created and not other people's to-do. And we have access to our user right now in our request. Okay, so right here we can maybe log the request to the console just like this. So we can say console.log and then request.user, and this is the user that we attached to our request at the auth middleware as payload. So if I log the user to the console just like this, request.user, we should get that data. Okay, now let's try this one out, and I'll come to Postman, and then we should have a valid token for this to work. So I will revert this where we had a 5 and it have disappeared, so I'll paste it again. Yep, now we should get a user at our console, but here we should get an empty array. I will send, so we are getting an empty array. Let's check our console, and we are getting our payload ID, name, email, and when the token was created. So we will have access to the user ID, and when creating each to do, we'll also attach a user ID. So we'll be able to perform a check whether those IDs are equal, and then perform further authorization. So that's it for this video, and in the next video we'll start now checking at React, Redux, and also Material UI. Hey, what's up guys? So far so good. We have created most of our backend, where we created the CRUD operation API endpoints and the auth API endpoints, and in this video I want us to move on to the front end. So if you haven't watched some of the previous videos in this particular playlist, I recommend you do so that you can see how we created our backend using Node.js, Express, and MongoDB. I'll leave a link at the description section below to that particular playlist. So on the front end, we will be working with React. So what is React? React is a very popular JavaScript library which was created by Facebook for building user interfaces. And React is component based, so we'll be creating several components and then composing them to make more complex UIs. And it is also declarative. And what we mean by declarative is that when a particular piece of state changes in our application, React will efficiently update and render just the right components which were affected by that particular piece of state. So React won't re-render the whole application, but certain parts of the application which were affected by that particular piece of state. And then React can be used on mobile applications, so you can create mobile apps, that is iOS and Android apps, using React Native. So you can take your skills to the next level by learning React Native and start creating awesome mobile applications using React. So in our definition here, I want you to pay close attention to some keywords. The first one is library, and the other one is user interfaces. So React is a library and not a framework. The difference between a library and a framework is that a framework comes as a whole package for creating complex applications, but React is just a library for creating user interfaces. So React won't handle other parts of our application, e.g. routing or performing network requests. So for that, we'll need to depend on third-party libraries. For routing, we'll be using React Router. And what React Router does is to give us a multi-page feeling in our single-page React application. So with React, we only have one HTML page, that is index.html page, and we inject the whole application in that particular one page. But with the traditional websites, we usually have multiple HTML pages. We have an index.html page which is mostly the homepage. We have the about.html, contact.html, services.html, and we have a lot of HTML pages in the traditional websites. But with our React app, this is a single page web application. That means that we have only one HTML page, and then we will use React Router to bring the multi-page filling in our application. And then for network requests, we'll be using Axios, which is another very popular JavaScript library. As you can see, we have more than 16 million downloads within the last week. So Axios is a very popular library for performing network requests. We'll be able to perform the post request, get, and all those CRUD operation requests to our backend. And then for our components, we'll be making use of Material UI. So we want to be styling our components from scratch. We'll be using Material UI. It provides React components for faster and easier web development. And for state management, we'll be making use of Redux. So Redux gives us what we call a global state. So we'll have a Redux store which will contain our application state, and we can access this state from any other component instead of passing state via props, which is a much tedious way of doing things in React. So we'll be making use of Redux, and the good thing is that now in Redux we have hooks. So we'll be using hooks instead of using the traditional connect higher order component and map state to props at the bottom of our components. So traditionally we used to use the connect higher order component and do some crazy stuff at the bottom of the component in order to get our state and map it to props in that particular component. But in this case, we'll be doing things in a much easier way, so you don't need to fear Redux. We have a hook called use selector, which will select a piece of state from the store, and we can easily use it in a particular component. One last thing is that you'll need to have Node.js installed in your machine. So make sure Node.js is installed, which I assume you already have it installed because we have been working with the Node in this particular playlist from the start. So I just expect you to have it installed in your machine. Now, how do we create a React app? To create a React app, I'll just get out of this browser and I'll open this folder which I created when we were starting this series. And inside this folder, we created two folders, the backend folder and the frontend folder. On our backend is where we created our API endpoints, connected to the database, used the .env file for environment variables, and did all the fun stuff on the backend. But this time round, we'll be working on our front end. So what I want us to do is to open this folder on CMD. So I'll just type CMD here, and then I'll open the entire folder on Visual Studio Code. So I'll use code and a period. This will open the entire folder on Visual Studio Code. And once it opens, what we will be doing is that we will be running our backend server on this command prompt. And what we'll do is to just type cd and then the name of our backend folder, which is backend. This is where our server is located, and this should take us to that path, and we will run our backend using NodeMon. So this is how we run our server, and we'll be able now to connect to our server and do all the fun stuff with it. But for now, because we haven't reached the point where we are performing CRUD operations on our front end, we can leave this one out, but this is what we'll be doing later on in this particular series. Okay, so I'll just minimize this. I won't run it because we don't need it for now. But in our Visual Studio Code, I want us to work with our front end. So click at the terminal at the very top and then create a new terminal, and this kind of a terminal will open up on VS Code. And what we want to do is to enter into the front end folder using cd and then front end. And we want to create our React app in this particular folder. And how we create a React app is by using npx and then create a -react-app. And then at the end here, we usually place the name of our React app, and that creates a complete new folder in here with our React app. But I don't want any other folder inside the front end where we have our React app. I want our React app to be generated just inside our front end folder. So I'll just use a period, and the React app should be generated inside this particular folder. So for me, I have already done this. Okay, I have already created a React app inside the front end folder. So if I extend it, this is what was generated by running this command. So I want you to do this so that you can create a React app. And then after creating the React app, how you can start it is by using npm start. So when you press enter, this should start our React app on the browser. Okay, so after a few minutes, your React app will automatically open on the browser, and it is running on localhost 3000. So remember, our server will be running on localhost 5000. So once the React app completely loads, you'll get such an output, which is a template for us to get started with. So when I come back, you can see our React app is running on localhost 3000. And in the next video is when we'll start looking at these other files that are in here. We have a public folder with all these files. We have an SRC folder with all these files, and then we have the Node modules. And that's why you need to have Node.js installed for you to work with React. And then when I open app.js here, this is what is included in our application, where we have the React logo and then edit and save to reload. So if I check here at the browser, you can see edit src app.js and save to reload. So we'll start working with all these files in the next video. This was just a kind of an introductory video to our front end, and from here on we'll now be able to move to more fun stuff. So I'll see you next. So in the last episode, we were able to create React app, and in this episode I want us to register the different routes that we'll be needing in our application. So before we do that, I want us to take a look at the different files that we have right here, and we can start with the public folder. And inside the public folder, you'll see that we have an index.html file, and this is the only HTML file that we'll be having in this application. And this is where you can change like the title of our app. Just right here, you can change React app to maybe to do app, and then you can define the different meta tags for the application for SEO purposes. You can also change the favicon just right here, or you can just change it from the public folder where we have a favicon.icon. And then when you scroll at the bottom here, you'll see that we have a div with an ID of root, and this is where our React app will be rendered, so that the whole application appears as a single page application. So when we go to our SRC folder and check the index.html file, you'll see that we have an object called React DOM, and we have a render method where we are rendering our app inside the root, and this root is the one that is just right here in our HTML file. So we have a div with an ID of root. So from the index.html file, you can remove some of these files because we don't need them. For example, most of the styling we will be depending on Material UI component. So I'll just remove the index.css file, and also delete it from our SLC folder here. And then when you move to the app.js file, which is a component imported in our index.js file so that it can be rendered at the root of our application, you'll see that we also have some files that we won't be needing. For example, we don't need to have the logo here. I'll just remove it. We also don't need to have the app.css file, so I'll also remove this one and I'll delete them from the SLC folder. So the app.css and also logo.svg. And then I want us to create our different components which we will style later, but for now we'll be using them to register our different routes. So in my SLC folder, I'll create a new folder called components. And then inside this folder, we'll also have several folders. The first one is the auth folder. So in here, we'll have the sign-in component and the sign-up component. And then we will have the navbar. So I'll create a folder called navbar. And then the last folder will contain our to-dos file. So right here, I'll also create another folder called to-dos. And we can start with our auth folder here. I'll create a new file inside the auth folder called signin.jsx. And you can see the convention that I am using here. The file for this component starts with a capital letter, but for our folders, we are starting with small letters. And I am using JSX because this is a syntax which looks more like HTML, which we'll be using in React. And then now to create this component, I'll be making use of an extension which is available in VS Code called Simple React Snippets. So if I come to the extensions here and then search for Simple React Snippets, this is the extension that I'll be using, and it will make my work much easier when creating the different components. So if I scroll at the bottom here, these are the shortcuts that I'll be using. There is IMR, meaning import React, and then there is SFC for creating a stateless functional component. And if you are creating class components, you can use CC, and you can also use any of these shortcuts if you want, but mostly I'll be using SFC and IMR. So I'll come back to the sign-in component and I'll import React in this file using IMR. And then I'll create a stateless functional component using SFC. And the name of our component will be sign-in. And inside the return, I'll just include a React fragment and return a simple H2, but later we'll come back here and create a form for signing in the users. So right here, I'll just say H2, and I'll just say sign in so that we can know that this is the sign in component, okay? And then I'll copy this content of our sign in component, and I'll go back to our auth folder and create a new file. And now this will be sign up. And I'll paste what we had in sign in, okay? So this is supposed to be signup.jsx. So I'll add .jsx, and then I'll change now the sign in here to sign up. So you can select the sign in and then use Control D, and you can edit multiple times here. Sign up. Now we already have our sign in component and sign up component. Let's go to the navbar and create a new file called navbar.jsx, and in here we'll have the navbar component. So similarly, I'll select this, use Control D, and I can replace sign in with navbar. And then now we can go to our to-dos, and I'll create a todos.jsx file. And in here, I'll paste this content and replace sign in with to-dos. So later, we'll be having more files in our to-dos, e.g. a file for adding a new to-do or listing the to-dos and linking those files or components to these to-dos. So this will be like the root of our to-dos. But for now, this will be good enough for registering our routes. Now, to register our routes, we need to import a new module or a new library, which is React Router DOM. And first of all, we'll install it. Just open a new terminal, because the terminal that we already have here is running our development server. So open a new terminal. And then inside this new terminal, you'll just say npm I for install, and then react hyphen router hyphen DOM. And this should install React Router DOM in our application so that we can create our different routes. So press enter. And when I come back to my first terminal here, you'll see that we have an error in our app.js line 6. So I'll go to app.js, and this error is coming because we already removed our logo, but we are trying to display it in our application. So what I'll do, I'll just remove everything from in here so that we remain with a div with a class of app. Actually, I'll also remove this class name, and then I can just display a h2, and I'll just say to do app. And then at the top, I'll also import React in this file using imr, just like that. Now let's check whether our React Router DOM was successfully installed, and it's still loading. But as it installs, we can import different components from React Router DOM. So in our app.js, I'll just say import, and we destructure the browser router, which is a component coming from React Router DOM. And then we will have a route component for registering the different routes. And finally, we'll also have a switch component. And I'll show you why we need this component in this particular file. So switch, and all this will be coming from React hyphen router DOM. And then we need to import our different components from the other files. We will import the sign-in component because we'll have a sign-in route. We'll also import the sign-up component, the navbar, and our to-dos component. So at the top here, I'll just say import to-dos, and this will be from components stroke to-dos stroke to-dos, and then we will import our sign-in component, and this will be from components stroke auth stroke sign in. This is import, and then I will duplicate this so that we can replace sign in with sign up. Let's also import our navbar from components stroke navbar and then stroke navbar. So now we are importing all the components that we need in this particular file, and as you can see now our React Router DOM have successfully installed. So I'll just minimize this one, and then we need to wrap everything that is inside our application with this browser router, and this will give every component in our application access to the history object so that we can be able to navigate between the different components. So I'll replace this div with just a React fragment, and then I'll remove this h2 and replace it with the browser router component, which we are getting from React Router DOM. So browser router, and then in here is where we are going to register our different routes. So the navbar should be accessible from every route. So at the very top I'll include our navbar component just like this, and then I will use now the route component to register the different routes. So right here I'll say route, and the first prop for our route component is usually the path. So we can define the path for this particular route. So here the path will be equal to sign in. So I'll include stroke sign in, and then the second prop will be component, and at the component we will load our sign in component. So component will be equal to sign in. So when we navigate to our sign in path here, we should load the sign in component. I'll duplicate this and I'll change this sign in to sign up, and the sign in component here to sign up component. I'll change our Rust route path to be the root, and then the component that will be loaded here is our to-dos component. Now when I go to the browser, you will see that at our root localhost 3000 we are loading the navbar, and also we are loading our to-dos component. So navbar will be accessible from any route because we included it at the very top. We didn't specify any path for our navbar. And then if we try to go to the sign up, so right here we can try to access our sign up. Now you'll see that we have the navbar, we have the sign up, but we are also loading our to-dos component here. So this is a weird behavior. We shouldn't have this to-dos component, but at least our sign up is loading. Let's try to load the sign in here by changing the path to sign in. Now we have the navbar, the sign in, and also we have a to-dos component being loaded. So this behavior is happening because the algorithm that is used to map our path will try to check all the paths, and if any of these paths are matching that particular path which we are loading, all those components will be loaded. For example, what I mean is that when we try to load our sign-in path, our algorithm will also check the sign up, and also it will check this path right here. And you'll see that at the beginning of the sign-in, we have a slash, which is our last path. So this to-dos component will be loaded because it is matching this particular path, and then our sign-in component will also be loaded because it is matching this path. So we will load both the sign-in and our to-dos component. Now, to prevent this behavior, we either use the exact prop. So in our to-dos component here, we can use the exact prop, and this will only load if the path is matching exactly this path. So if we have the sign-in, this path won't load our to-dos component because in front of our slash we also have sign-in. So this path is not exactly this one. Okay, so this is one way that you can do this. And when we come to our browser, you will see that we are on our sign up path, but our to-dos is no longer being loaded. And when we try to access the sign in path, you'll see that our to-dos is no longer loaded because this path is not exactly this one, our home page. So if I try to load the home, you'll see now that our to-dos is loaded. Another way you can do this is by using our switch component. So the switch component will load the first matching path. So if this path matches with what we have at our URL, this component will be loaded and the rest will be ignored. So if I remove the exact prop here and wrap our routes inside the switch component, so switch, and I'll then move these routes inside the switch, each path will be loaded at a time. If it finds the first match, the other paths will be ignored. So let's try to load the sign-in. In our browser, I'll come to the sign-in right here, and you'll see that we have the navbar and the sign-in, so our to-dos is not loaded. So this is the one that I'll stick with right here. Okay, and this is how we register our routes using React Router DOM. Later on, we will be making more use of our React Router DOM, e.g. working with the links and so on and so forth. For example, on our navbar, we will have different links to navigate to this particular routes. For example, when we click on a link, we go to sign in, to sign up, or in to-dos. But for now, this is good enough, and in the next video we will start going to the individual components and styling them further using Material UI. For example, we'll create the forms for sign in, for sign up, we'll create our navbar, and also we'll design our to-dos, how they will appear, and we'll also include a form for adding our to-dos. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you next. Hey, what's up guys? So in the last episode, we were able to register our different routes using React Router DOM, and in this episode, I want us to style our UI using Material UI components. So this is what we currently have, but we want to achieve a design just like this one, where we will have a top navbar with the name of our app, some details, and some buttons on the other side. And then we'll have an input field for a new to-do, and the to-dos will be displayed at the bottom. Each to-do will have some action buttons on each side, and then we'll also have the sign in and the sign up forms. Okay, so I want us to start by creating this top navbar. Okay, and to create this top navbar, we will need to install Material UI in our React app. To install Material UI, you can visit material-ui.com, and then when you scroll at the bottom here, you'll see some instructions on how you can install Material UI and usage instructions. So this is the command that you need to use to install Material UI. So just copy this, and then when you go to your code editor, you can open a new terminal, new, and a terminal will open at the bottom here. And then just paste that command right here and press enter to install Material UI in your application. So I have already run this command, so I want to do it again. And to confirm it's available in our app, you can go to package.json and check on the dependencies right here. Okay, so make sure you install Material UI, and then I'll move to the navbar component. Inside our navbar folder here, go to navbar component, and this is where we want to create our navbar. So we need to import several components from Material UI library, just like this. Import. The first component will be appbar, and then we will have typography for the text, and then we will have toolbar. So I'll show you why we need toolbar component in this component, and then we'll have button for all our buttons in this particular navbar. Okay, and then this will come from Material UI library. So from Material UI, and then stroke core. And then we'll also need a hook from Material UI called make styles, and this will help us to create some custom CSS styles. So we won't use a lot of CSS style because most of these components have already been styled by the Material UI team. So this is just for simple custom styles, okay? And this will come from Material UI core, and then we have a module called styles, just like that. Now with this two, we will be able to create our navbar. So let's come at the very bottom where we have our H2 and remove it. And we want to use our appbar component right here. So appbar. And then inside here, we will use our typography component. Typography, and inside the typography is where we can enter the title of our to-do app. So I can say to-do app, some fancy camel casing here, just like that. And with typography, we should specify the type of text that we are entering here using a prop called variant. So right here we have a prop called variant. And with this, you can specify whether this text is a heading, a paragraph, a body, and so on. Okay, for this case, I want it to be a H4. And if you get confused with any of this, you should check the Material UI documentation. And I should spell this one correctly, variant. Okay, we can check what we have at the moment. Okay. So I'll remove this one. This import, I think it was automatically imported, but we don't need it here. So I'll go back to the browser, go to the to-do app, and you can see we have something that is failing here, no such file or directory. So one thing that might cause this is that Material UI in my application was not properly installed. So for me, I'll reinstall Material UI library and I'll see if this error disappears. So I didn't touch the code, I reinstalled Material UI and restarted my server. So this is what we currently have, the to-do app, and this is our appbar component. And now when we come back, we can add a prop to the appbar, and that is the position prop. I want this one to be static, so I'll set it to static. And you can change the colors for your appbar using the color prop here. and the primary color is that blue color, but you can also set it to secondary color, which is I think reddish. Yeah, there you go. So the secondary color is this reddish color, and you can check on colors on the Material UI library, so there are other options you can use. So I'll go with the default, so I won't specify the color here. And then I want, when we click this to do app, I want it to take us to the home page. So this will act like a link, okay? And to do that, we will use the link component from React Router DOM. So I can just import it at the top. So I'll say import link, and this will be from React Router DOM. And then at the bottom here, we should wrap our to-do app inside the link component. So I can say link, and then we take a to-do app in here, and we have a prop called to, okay, in this component, and we can enter the path where we want this to take us to. So this is the route path, and this path must be defined in our routes here, so it will take us to this path, which is our home page. Now when we check this, you'll see that the styling for the to-do app have changed to an anchor tag. So you'll see that this styling have changed to an anchor tag because of that link component, but when we place it, it will always take us to the home page. So if we go to the sign up component or sign in component, you'll see that the navbar was common, but when we click on the to-do app here, it will take us to the home page, which is our to-dos page. Now let's change the styling for this to-do app using the hook that we imported at the top, which is make styles. So you can search on Material UI how make styles work. So at the top here, just search for make styles, and then you click on that make styles. And when I scroll at the bottom here, you import make styles, and then you will create a constant you call the make styles hook, and inside you pass an object with some styles that you want, and then later you create a const called classes, and you call the use styles right here. So let's do this. I'll just copy this one right here, and then come back to our editor here. After our imports, this is where I will use make styles. So we import make styles at the top, and then we create a constant use styles, make styles, and then inside we pass some styles, okay? And I want to change the style for our link. So right here, I'll create a key called link style. You can call it any name you want, and then inside this key we pass an object. I will change the text color right here, so I remove what is inside here, and then I will change the text color, so that is color, and I'll set it to white, okay, what we had earlier, that is hash FAFAFA, something like that. And then I use a comma, and then I want to remove the text decoration so that we don't have an underlined text. So text decoration, and I'll set this one to none. Now to use this one, I'll come inside the navbar component, and in here I can create a constant const classes, and then I invoke use styles, just like that. And now we can use these classes to access any key in here, okay? So how we do that is to come to our link now, and then use a class name. So this is how we use our classes in JSX. So you can see this is a HTML like format, but instead of using class, we use class name. Okay, so we can enter a class name here, and the class name that we want is link style, which will give us these styles. So how to access these styles? We'll use the classes right here, dot link styles. So right here we can pass an object, and then we'll have classes dot link style, just like that. And this should change the style for our to do app to have color white and also text decoration of none. So yeah, let's see. I refresh this one, and there we go. Now we have a link, and also the styling is okay. So if I go to the other component, which is sign up, and try to click to do, it still works perfect. Now let's go on and style our UI further. Now you have seen how we use make styles, which is a hook, and we can now proceed to the next step, which is adding another typography. So just after this typography, I'll add another typography here. So typography, and then the variant for this one, variant, I want it to be subtitle 2. So I'll set it to sub title. So this is just a smaller text than the H4 here. So subtitle 2, and then I can include the text here, logged in as, logged in as ciao. When we add authentication, we'll be able to dynamically display the name of the logged in user. Okay, but when we look at this, you'll see that we will have a weird behavior. Let's see, it will come at the bottom here, so they are not side by side. So to make this one to be side by side, this is where we will use our toolbar component, because it will flex the item in a row instead of in a column. So our app bar flexes the item in a column, our toolbar will flex the items in a row. So just after the app bar, we should call our toolbar component, and we include all the typographies inside there, just like that. Okay, that's the purpose of the toolbar, just to arrange them nicely. So I want to remove this space, and if I save this one, it should out of format due to prettier, and I should also cross this one to create more spacing here. So perfect, this is now nice, and when I come back here, you'll see that they'll be side by side. So momentarily we have an error, but when I do this, now you'll see that we have the to do app and logged in as side by side, and it have also created some spacing around our text. Now we need to make this one to go to the center at least, and for that we'll make use of our make styles again. I'll create a styling here called root, and I'll set this one to a flex grow of 1. Now we can use this style at the bottom here on our typography. So we set a class name, we use our classes right here, dot root, and this will set the flex grow of our logged in as chao to be 1. Okay, and then we should also set our to do app to have a flex grow of 1. Class name, classes dot root. So this will have a flex grow of 1, and this one a flex grow of 1. So they should occupy like equal spacing. So if I come back and try to refresh, you'll see now this is pushed to the other side. Okay, perfect. Now we need some buttons on the other side. So at the bottom here, after the typography, we will add a button component which we already imported earlier. And then inside this button, we will have sign out. Just like that. And I want when we click this button, it takes us to the sign in component because we are signing out of the application. So what I can do is that I can add an on-click event to this button right here. So I can just say on click, and when we click this one, it will call a helper function. So right here we will use an arrow function, and it will call a helper function, and this helper function will call it handle sign out, just like this. So we haven't created this helper function, so we can create it now. Just before our return statement, we can say const handle sign out, and then this will be an arrow function. And in here, the first thing that we will do is to sign out the user. So when we add authentication, we'll come back here and sign out the user. Okay, and then after signing out the user, we will redirect them to the sign in component. And for this, we need another import from React Router DOM, which is also a hook called use history. So right here where we imported the link, we will also import use history, and this is a hook and we can make use of it in this component. First of all, I'll create a constant here called history, and I'll set this one to use history, and I invoke this hook just like that. So right here I can just say history, and we have a method called push, which will push the user to the path that we specify in here, and we want it to take us to the sign in component, just like that. Okay, first of all, let's see what we have. I'll refresh, and we have our button on the side here. So the thing that I want is that I want this button to be white in color, just like this one, sign out. And how I'll do that is by adding another key in our make styles, and I'll call this one auth button. Or rather, we can use a prop called color inside this button, and we inherit the color from the parent, which will be white. So right here I can just say color will be equal to inherit. So this will inherit color from our app bar component here, which will be white. Okay, let's see. So yeah, there we go. So now we have a sign out button, and when we click this button, we should go to the sign in component. Perfect. When we click this one, we go to the to-dos. Now we need the other buttons, so let's create them just at the bottom. So we'll have another button. I'll save this one to auto format, and we will have another button. This will be for sign in, and then we'll have another one, and this will be for sign up. Now let's add the different props. We'll have color of inherit, and then in here we want this one to be a link, which will take us to the sign in component. So I can use the link component, and take my sign in here. So we will use this class name. I'll just copy it so that the link will remain to be white, and it will not have any text decoration. For the next button, color, and then this will be inherit, and then we also want it to be a link, which will take us to the sign up component. So link, and I take this text in here, and then I use this class name, and also we should increase the to prop so that we can specify which component it will take us to. So right here we can say to sign in, we can say to sign up. I'll save that, and I'll come at the top here and remove this one because we ain't using it anymore, and we can test our button so far. So we have some errors. I'll try to refresh, and there we go. We have all the buttons: sign out, sign in, sign up. When I click sign in, we go to the sign in component. When I click sign up, we go to the sign up component. So later on, when we add authentication, we will conditionally render these buttons so that if you are logged in, you won't see the sign in and the sign up button, and if you are not logged in, you'll see the sign in and the sign up button. So for now, I want us to achieve this design where our navbar is a bit at the center and we have spacing on the other ends. So what we can do is to go to our app component, and here we will import a component from our Material UI components. So right here I'll say import, and the component that we want is the container component, and this will be coming from Material UI. So at Material UI core, and then when I come at the bottom here, I can wrap all our components inside the container. So right here I'll say container, and I move the whole of this content in here, and then we can specify the max width for our container. Max width, and I'll set this to medium, so this should create some spacing for our application on the sides. Let's see, and we have a very big error here. Now we are good. So you can see now we have some spacing on the ends, which is perfect. So now we are done with the navbar component, and in the next section we will go on and design this particular input field, and also we'll see how we can use icons in our application using Material UI. Okay. Hey, what's up guys? So in the last episode, we were able to install Material UI in our application, and we created this top navbar. And in this episode, I want us to proceed to our other components, where we will create a component for adding a to-do, and then we'll be able to work with icons in this video, and we'll also create the sign in and the sign up forms. So to get started, we need to install Material UI icons in our application. So you can come to Material UI website, and then when you come at the search bar here and search for icons, choose the first option. When you scroll at the bottom here, you'll see installation details. So to install Material UI icons in your application with npm, you just run this command: npm install at Material UI /icons, and with yarn you run this command. So just copy this command right here, and then go to Visual Studio Code, open a new terminal, paste that command right here, and all you need to do is to press enter to install Material UI icons in your application. So I have already done this and I won't repeat it just to save time. So I'll close this one, and then to see how you can use these icons, you can scroll at the bottom here and you can import the icons just like this. So the name of the icon, and they come from Material UI icons module. And then to get all the icons and their names, you can come at the top here and you'll see this link. You can search for full list of these icons, click it, and then you land to this page where you can see all the available icons in Material UI. So you can filter them, filled, outlined, rounded. So you can choose any kind of icons that you want, and these are the names of those icons. Okay, so you can scroll them and see the different icons that are available, and you can be able to use them in your application. Now let's get started by creating this component for adding a new to-do. So I'll come back to the text editor, and then we had created a component called todos.js, and what we need to do is to add a new file inside our to-dos folder called add todo.js. So I'll use JSX instead of JS, and then I'll come in the todos.js file, copy everything that is in here, and then paste it in our add todo.jsx file. Now we need to change the name of this component, so I'll select this one, use Ctrl D 2 times to select these to-dos and these to-dos, and then hit backspace and change the name to add to do. Now this is our add to do component. Now the next thing that I will do is that I will import this component inside our todos.jsx file right here. I'll just say import add to do, and this will be coming from the add to do file, which is available in the same folder, add to do. And we can use this add to do component in here instead of a h2. So I'll just say add to do, just like that. And then I'll create another file in our to-dos folder, and I'll call it list todos.jsx, and this will help us to list our different to-dos that will be coming from the database. So in here I'll simply paste what I had copied earlier and change the name for our to-dos component here. Use Ctrl D and then come at the front and include list, just like that. Now I can also import this component in our todos.jsx file. So I'll come here and say import list todos, and this will be coming from list todos, just like that. And then we can use it at the bottom here, list todos. Okay, now we should see add to do and list to do in our app. I'll come back and check it, and there we go, add to do, list to do's. Now let's tell our add to do component. So I'll come to the add to do component, and I'll import two components from the Material UI core library, and that is a text field and a button. So right here I'll simply say import ID structure text field and a button, and this will be coming from the Material UI core library. This is supposed to be a comma and not a full stop. So from Material UI stroke core, and then we will need an icon, which is a send icon for our button coming from Material UI icons module. So right here I'll just say import, the name of the icon is send, and this will be coming from Material UI icons. And then now we can use this text field and this button in here. So I'll just get rid of add to do, and then I'll include a form tag. So this should start with a small letter. It's just a tag and not a component. And then in here we can include the text field component. So text field, it is self-crossing, and then below the text field we'll also have a button, just like that. Now I can include a closing and an opening for the button, so that in here we can include an icon, which is our send icon, just like that. So now we have included a text field, a button, and also an icon. So this text field should be capital here. So now this is what we currently have: a text field and a button which have an icon, but we can't clearly see the button, we only see the icon. And also we don't have a text field that we want this kind of a text field. So what we can do is to add several props to achieve our style. So in our text field we can add these props. The first thing we will add is an ID for our text field. So right here I'll say ID to be equal to enter to do, and then we will have a label which will be enter to do. Some camel casing here, it is not a must, enter to do. And then we can set autofocus for this field. We set it to full width, and then we will have some other properties here, like the value and an on change event later when we start working with the actual data. But for now this is good enough. Now let's go to our button, and we want to set a color for our button to be primary, which is the blue color. And then we will set the variant to be contained, so it can be outlined, contained, or it can remain as default. The type for our button will be submit. Just like that. And that's all we need for now, and we can see what we have. So I'll come back to the browser and wait for this to refresh. And now this is what we have. Our text field have not been styled correctly. So when I look at the label, autofocus, we should have a variant right here, variant to be outlined. So just like that. And now we should have the design that we want for the text field. So perfect. Now we want our enter to do text field and the button to be side by side, and for this we will depend on some custom styling. And for custom styling we used a hook earlier called make styles. So let's import this hook from Material UI, just right here. So we will import make styles, and this will be from at Material UI. At Material UI styles. And now we can use this make styles to create some custom styles. So just above our component here we can create a constant, use styles, and then we invoke the make styles hook here, and we pass an object inside with the styles that we want. So I'll create a key called form style, and then I'll use an object to list the different styles. So we want a margin top and bottom to be 0px, and then left right to be auto, just to center our text field, and this one should be inside quotes. So I'll select all of them and use a quotes, make them to be inside the quotes, and then we will have a padding for our text field, and I want this one to be 30px. So padding 30px, and then we will have a border radius, just a straight border radius. Remember to use a comma here and then use border radius. And you can see that we are using camel casing here because this is JavaScript, and then right here you say 9px. I'll include a box shadow with these values 0px, 0px, and then this will be 12px and negative 3px, and then the color will be black, so hash 000000. And I have realized that this is misspelled, so make sure this is make styles. And now the next thing I'll do for our form styles is that I'll add a display of flex and a justify content of space between, just to make the text field and the button to be side by side. So right here I can say display to be flex. Remember to use a comma here and a comma here. Use justify content to be space between. Make sure this is spelled correctly. And that's all for our form style. We'll also have a styling for our button. So right here I'll say submit button to have a margin left of 20px. Now to use these styles, I'll come inside our component, create a constant called classes, and then invoke use styles, just like that. And now I can use these classes to access the different properties inside our make styles hook. So right here for our form, we can set a class name. We set it to be equal to classes dot form. What did we call it? Form style, just like that. And then we can add more properties for our form. I'll add no validate. Will depend on the server side validation which we added using Joy. So no validate, and then autocomplete. I'll set it to be off. So off. Now let's come to our button here and add this style, submit button style. So I'll say class name and I'll set it to classes dot submit button. I guess that's correct, right? And that's it. We can now see the kind of styling that we are having for our add to do component. So I'll come back to the browser, and perfect. I think we are almost there. We have this text field and the button on the side, and we have some box shadow on it. Now the only thing we need to do is to create some spacing between the nav bar and this one, and also to make this one to be a bit smaller, just like we have in this app. Okay, yeah, just like we have here. So for this one, we won't touch our add to do component. We'll go back to our app.js file, and right here I'll use the make styles hook to create some custom styling, so I can import it from Material UI styles. So import the make styles hook, from Material UI styles, and then at the top of our app function we can create a constant use styles, which will be equal to make styles. We invoke it and pass an object in here where we can pass a key content style, and all I need to do is to add a top margin. So margin, this will be top and bottom to be 30px, and then left right will be auto, just to center it. This should be content style, and I guess we are good. Now I can come here and then create a constant, so const classes, which will be equal to use styles. I invoke it just like that and make sure the camel casing is okay. And now we can use classes to access content style. So what I will do is that I will wrap everything in here apart from the navbar inside a container component, and we had already imported the container component at the top. So right here I can use the container component again, and then I'll move the switch inside this container. Now we can use these classes right here. I'll set a class name to be equal to classes dot what did we call it, content style. Yeah, just like that. And then we can set the max width for this container, so max width, and I want it to be smaller than this one, so this will be SM for small, this is medium, and that's it. But I don't know why these errors are popping. Okay, this should be closed this way. Yeah, I think that should make the error disappear. Perfect. Now let's check our app and see if we have what we want. And there we go. Now we have our form and the submit button for adding a new to do. Perfect. Now the next thing we are going to style is our list to do's component. Before we proceed to the list to do's component, let's fix our autofocus on our field here. So when we come back to the code editor and go to our add to do component, you'll see that in our autofocus we should be using camel casing. Instead of using small f, use a capital F, and this should fix that. So when our app reloads, it should autofocus our enter to do field, and there we go. Now let's go to our list to do's component, and the first thing that we should have is a title, just like this one. Let me show you the to do's, and then we'll have a component inside our list to do's, which is a single to do. So this is a single to do, this is another single to do, and so on and so forth. So I'll add this title by importing the typography component from Material UI. So right here, just import typography, and this is from Material UI core. and then we can use that typography right here. First of all, I'll start with a div, and I'll move this one, and then in here is where we'll have our typography component, and we should remove this. So import typography from Material UI core, and then we have the typography component here. And in here I can simply say the to-dos, and then the variant for our typography will be H5. So this will be H5, and then after this heading is when we'll have our to-do component. So let's create the to-do component. Inside our to-dos folder, I'll add a new file called to-do.jsx, and I'll copy everything that we have in our list to-dos component and paste it in our to-do component. Now the only thing that I remove is the whole of this, and add a H2 simply saying to do. So this is a single to do, and then we change the name of our component, use Ctrl D, delete, and rename it to do. Now let's import this component in our list to do's component. So right here I'll say import to do from, so they are in the same folder, to do, and we can use this component just right here. So I'll duplicate this so that we have at least two to-dos in our list to-do component, and we can see what we have in our app. So I'll come back here, go to the app that we are working on, and we have the title, and then we have two to-dos. Now let's create some spacing between our form here and the title here, and also style our list to do's. We'll create this shadow and so on. So I'll make use of the hook, make styles hook. So in our list to do's component, I'll import make styles from Material UI styles. So this will come from Material UI styles. And then before our component here, I'll create a constant called use styles, and then we invoke our make styles hook. By now you are used to this. We invoke it and pass an object. I will use to do's style as the key, and then we set a margin. Our top will be 20px, so this is top and bottom. Left right will be auto, just to center our content, and then we'll set a padding of 20px. We include a border radius of 9px, and we also want to have a box shadow. So right here I'll say box shadow, to be 0px, 0px, 12px, -3px, and the color will be black. So hash with 6 zeros here. Now we can use this style by creating a constant here called classes. which will be equal to use styles. Right here we'll set a class name and we access our to do styles using our classes here. So we'll say classes dot to do styles. Just like that, and now we should have a box shadow around our to-dos and some margin top and bottom and also padding, and we can preview this, and there we go. Nice. So the next thing is that we will work on our to-do component. In our to-do component, we want to have the name of our to-do, the author, the date, and then some action buttons on the side. So I'll come back to our list to do's and then I'll include a semicolon here, just some fancy text, and then I'll go to the to-do.jsx file. We will need to import several components from Material UI Core. The first one will be typography. The other one will be a button for our buttons, and then we'll also have a button group. So this will be for our action buttons. So button group, and then we will import several icons from Material UI icons. So let's import them here. The first one will be create, and then we will have a delete icon and a check circle icon for checking a to-do as done. And all this will be coming from Material UI icons. Just like that. Now let's make use of these components. Right here I'll use a div, and then I'll use another div for the content of our to-do, and below this we'll also have another div for our buttons. So in here we will start with a typography, and this will be the name of our to-do. So for example, we can say our maybe learn React, and the variant will be subtitle 1, include another typography. Actually I'll just duplicate what we have here, so I'll select these and then use Alt Shift and a bottom arrow so that we duplicate what we have, and this will be our author. So we can set the author to be Chao. Later we'll dynamically display this name depending on who created that particular to do, and then this will be the date, and then let's say 4 days ago. So we'll also display this dynamically depending on when the to-do was added. So the variant for this one, I'll set it to be body 2, the same as this one. And then when I scroll at the bottom here, we can come inside this div and create our buttons, our action buttons. I'll use the button group component, and we can create the first button in here, and inside this button we'll simply have an icon, and the first icon we will use is for checking a to-do as done. So I'll say check circle, and for our button group we'll have several props. The first one is the size, and I'll use the small size, so here I'll set size to small, area label will be outlined. So right here you'll have area hyphen label. This will be outlined primary button group. And then I'll duplicate this button 2 more times and change the icon from check circle to create and check circle here to delete. I'll set the color for our delete button to secondary. So this is reddish color. And the color for our create to primary. And for our check circle, I'll set the color to action. So later on, we'll conditionally render the color for our check circle depending on whether a to-do is done or not. At this point, we can see what we have. We should close this one properly. I'll go to the browser and wait for it to refresh. And perfect. Now this is what we currently have. We have the details for our to-dos and then the action buttons. But we want to display the details for this to do side by side. So we'll have the details and then the action buttons will be on the side. And for our other and added art or the date will be grayed out. Okay, just like we have here. So this is grayed out and then we have them on the side, and we'll also add a border around them and some padding. So with this we will use custom styles. So I'll come back here and we need to import the make styles hook. So let's do that. I will import make styles. And this will be from at material UI styles, and then just before our component we create a constant use styles. We set it to make styles and invoke this hook, pass an object in here, and the key here we'll use to do style, and we can include the different styles for our to do. So first of all, we want some margin top and bottom for each to do to be 20px, and then left and right to be auto. We want some padding for each to do. I'll set this one to 20px. I will include a border for each to do to be 2px solid, and then this is the code for the gray color bd. And then we will have some border radius, and this will be 9px. And then to display the content side by side with the our action buttons, we'll use flexbox. So right here I'll set display to flex, and then justify content to space between. And to gray out our other and added art, we will use another key here, and I can call it maybe gray style. You can use any name, okay? And I'll simply set the color to this code #8f8f8f. So now let's make use of these styles, and I'll come right here, create a const classes, which will be equal to use styles. I invoke that. Now this div is the one that represents our entire to do, so I'll say class name to be equal to classes dot to do style. I guess that's what we called it, and then we can use the gray style right here on this typography and this one. So right here I'll set a class name to be classes dot gray style, the same as this one. I can just copy this and paste it here. Now let's take a look at our to-dos here, and our flex was not applied, so I'll come back to the code and check our flex styles. So I misspelled display. I think that should fix it, so I'll come back and confirm. And there we go. Now we have achieved the exact style as this one. Now the next step that we will take is to create our sign-in and our sign-up forms. Now to work on the sign-in component, let's go to our text editor and open the signin.jsx file. So we'll need to import several components from Material UI, that is a typography, a text field, and a button. So let's do that. Import typography. We will need a text field and also a button, and all this will come from Material UI core, just like that. And also we'll need some custom styles, so we can import the make styles hook, and all this will come from Material UI styles. So it can be this way, or you can also include core here. Either way it works. So in here I'll just create a form, and we will use our typography component. Right here we'll simply say sign in, and the variant for this one will be h5. The next thing that we will have is a text field, and we will have several props for the text field. We will have an ID, which we can set it to enter email. So this text field is for the email, and then we'll have a label, which will be enter email, and then we'll have a variant to be outlined, and finally we'll have full width, just like that. And then we'll duplicate this text field, and this one will be now for password, so enter password, enter password, and outlined full width. For the password, we'll also add a type of password so that the password is hidden, just like that. Now finally we'll need a button, so let's use the button component, and for the button it will say sign in. We can set several props. Variant will be outlined, then the color will be primary, which is a blue color, and the type will be submit. And now we have the layout of our form. So for the form, we can also include some props right here. So we can have no validate, and then autocomplete to be off, and then we will add some custom styles, but for now let's see what we have so far. Okay, so I'll come back to the browser. Text field is not defined, and let's see. So this is text field with the capital F here, and let's see what we have. So this is what we currently have, and our blue color was not applied to our button. So I'll come back and fix that. I'll check the color here, and it seems to be okay. Okay, variant here should be contained so that the blue color can be visible, but you can leave it at outlined if you want. So variant contained, primary, submit. Now let's proceed to some custom styling. At the top here, we'll create a constant, use styles, and this will be equal to make styles. We invoke this hook and pass an object in here. The first key will be form styles or form style ladder, and then we can pass several properties here. The margin, I want it to have 0px of margin top and bottom. Left and right will be auto. Padding to be 30px. I'll also set a border radius of 9px, and a box shadow. I'll use the box shadow for this one, so I'll just copy this from the list to do's component and come to our sign in, paste it here. So now we have the form style. The next thing is to use it, so I'll come here, create a constant called classes, and I set it to use styles. I invoke that. Now we can set a class name here, class name to be equal to classes dot form style. Yep, just like that. And now we can see what we currently have on the browser. So we have a cool box shadow here, and then some padding, but we need spacing between our different fields. So we can include another custom style right here, and I'll simply call it spacing, because that's what it does. And all we will do is to add some margin top of 20px, and now we can use this spacing key to access our margin top. So we will come on the text field component and add a class name to be equal to classes dot spacing. I will copy this, add it to this text field, come to the button and also add it here. So for each of these components, the button will have a margin top of 20px, margin top of 20px, and margin top of 20px. And when we look what we have, now we have some good spacing for our form. And that's it. When I enter the password here, it's hidden. Now let's go to the sign up form. And for the sign up, this will be super easy because we will use what we have in our sign in. So I'll copy everything here, open the sign up file here, and then select everything, paste our sign in content here. I'll come at the top, select this sign in, use Ctrl D so that we can edit multiple times, and change everything to sign up. And then when I come at the top here, I can start this with a small caps. Okay, now let's see what we can change, because now we already have a sign up component with an email text field, with a password text field, with a button that can submit the content. The only thing that we will add is another text field for the name. So I'll duplicate this at the top here. We change the ID to enter name. We change the label to enter name. And that's it. That's all we need to change. So we can check what we have. I'll come back to the browser, and there is our sign up form. So we can enter a name, email, and a password, and we sign up for an account. So at this point, I think we have successfully completed styling our UI. We have the forms, we have our to-dos component, entering a new to-do, the way we can display the to-dos. And in the next video, we'll now start working with the logic of our application. We will start by setting up Redux and then performing all the CRUD operations, and then later on we'll move to authentication and authorization. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and please make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of my videos. Hey, what's up guys? So in this video, we'll be able to perform all the CRUD operations in our application using React and Redux. So CRUD simply stands for create, read, update, and delete. We'll be able to create new resources in our database. We'll then be able to read those resources from the database and display them on the UI. And then we'll be able to update or edit a particular resource from the database and display the changes on the UI, and also we'll be able to delete a particular resource. And for us to do all this, we'll need to set up React and Redux. And React and Redux are completely different libraries, so we will need another library called React Redux for us to bind React and Redux together. We'll also create a Redux store, and a Redux store will act as a single source of truth of our application state. So we'll have a central place where we'll store the state globally, and we can access this state from any other component in our application. And we'll also create some reducers, and a reducer is simply a function which have access to the state and the actions, and it can use the state, the current state, and the action arguments to update the application state. And for us to actually update the state in our reducers, we'll need to dispatch actions. Okay, so what will happen is that we will for example click on a button, e.g. creating a new to-do, and then we'll dispatch an action creator after clicking that button. And with the help of Redux Dunk, we will halt that dispatch, perform an async action, for example access the database and save a particular to-do, and then get a response. Once we get a response, we'll be able to continue with the dispatch, and we'll dispatch an action which will have a type and a payload. And then we can check the type and the payload from our reducers with the help of this parameter. we can say something like action.type and update the state accordingly. So we'll see how we'll do all this in this particular video. Now we will be consuming some form of backend APIs, which are CRUD operation APIs, and we have already created these APIs using Node.js, Express, and MongoDB. So if you have no any information about it, you can go to my channel and then scroll at the bottom here, and you'll see this section where I have pinned this entire series. You can click on Manstack tutorial with auth, and you land to a page like this one where we have all the videos in this series. And from #0 to #13 is where we created our backend. So we were able to create an Express server, we connected to MongoDB, we were able to create the endpoints for handling CRUD operations, so handling post request, get request, delete, put, patch. We checked at Joy data validation and testing API endpoints using Postman. And then in this video, #13 is where we created our auth API endpoints using Node.js and JWT, which is a 1-hour video. And then after that is where we got started with React. We learned about React router and created our UI using Material UI. So this is our UI here. And now it's time that we add logic to this UI so that we can create a new to-do and perform these other CRUD operations. So make sure you check this one out and go through these videos so that you can be up to date to where we are at this point. In case you're new here, my name is Charles. I am a JavaScript developer, a coffee lover, and I create coding content here on YouTube. Now that sounds awesome, so please make sure you subscribe and turn on post notification so that you don't miss any of my videos. In case you have a question, you can always leave a comment at the comment section below, or you can find me on Twitter at ChowCharles. Also, please make sure you leave a thumbs up if you like this video, and in the next section we'll be able to get started with setting up React and Redux. So in this section, I want us to set up React and Redux, and the first step that you'll take is to open a new terminal and run this command to install these 3 libraries. To install Redux, React Redux, and as I said before, React Redux will help us to bind React library and Redux library, and also Redux Dunk. And Redux Dunk is a middleware which will help us to perform async actions in our action creators. So we'll see how we'll do that later on. Once you install these 3 libraries, the next step is to make use of them. So I can close this terminal, and we can start by creating a Redux store. So to create a Redux store, we will import a create store method from the Redux library. So right here I'll say import create store, and I'll also import apply middleware so that we can configure our Redux Dunk library too. Okay, so you import create store and apply middleware, and this is from the Redux library, just like that. And now we can use this create store to create a Redux store, and a Redux store is where our application state will reside. So we'll have a central place where we'll have the entire state, and we can access the state from any other component in our application. So right here you can say const store will be equal to create store. We invoke this one, and the first parameter is a root reducer. And a root reducer is a combination of our different reducers that we will have in this application. So we will have a to-dos reducer and also an auth reducer, and a combination of these 2 reducers is what will be included in our root reducer. So right here I can say root reducer. We will create this one in a minute, so just pass root reducer. And then the second parameter is where we can make use of apply middleware and configure our Redux Dunk. So right here I can say apply middleware. We invoke this, and in here we pass our Redux Dunk. So let's import something from Redux Dunk. We will say import Dunk from Redux Dunk. And then we pass this Dunk just in here. Now let's create this root reducer. I'll come to the root of our application, and inside the SLC folder, I'll create a new folder called store. So everything to do with Redux store will be included in this folder. That includes action creators and reducers. So inside this store folder, I'll create a new folder for our reducers. And then inside the reducers, we can now create a new file called root reducer. .js. And as I told you before, root reducer will simply combine our different reducers in this application. And since we are dealing with CRUD operations in this video, we will create a reducer called to-dos reducer, which will handle our CRUD operations. So right here, I'll say to-do reducer.js. Later on, we'll add another reducer called auth reducer for authentication. But for now, this will be good enough to set up our React and Redux libraries, okay? Now let's enter to the to-do reducer. And a reducer is simply a function which have access to state and also action. And we can use those two parameters to update the state. So right here, all we will do is to create a function called to-do reducer, which will be equal to, we accept several parameters. The first one is the state, and we can default the state to an empty object or an array. And then the second parameter here is action, and we can use this to access the action arguments, e.g. action.type, action.payload, and update the state accordingly depending on those arguments, okay? So we have state and action, and this is supposed to be an arrow function. And in here is where now you can update the state. But for now, we don't want to do anything complex. So we'll simply return the state, and then later on, we'll come here and update the state depending on an action which was performed, okay? So right here, I'm simply returning the state, and then at the bottom here, we should export this to-do reducer. So I'll say export default to-do reducer, just like that. I guess everything is fine. And now we can import this to-do reducer inside our root reducer. So I'll come to the root reducer and import our to-do reducer. So I'll say import to-do reducer, and this will be from, they are in the same folder, so to-do reducer. And then we need to import something from the Redux library, which is combine reducers, so that we can be able to combine our different reducers, okay? So right here, I'll simply say import combine reducers, and this will be coming from the Redux library. This is supposed to be from. Now we can make use of these combine reducers. So I'll come at the bottom here. I'll create a constant called root reducer. We set it to be equal to combine reducers. We invoke this as a method, and we pass an object in here. And this is where we can combine our different reducers. This is supposed to be const. So right here, I'll set our to-do reducer to be to-dos. Okay, so to-dos, to-do reducer. You can leave it as a to-do reducer, but to-dos sounds more fun, so we'll be accessing the to-dos state using this one. And now we have our root reducer set. All we need to do is to export it. So export default root reducer. Okay, later on we'll be able to import our auth reducer and include it in here. Okay, now let's come back to our index.js file and we import that root reducer in this file. So I'll say import root reducer from, we enter the store folder, we access the reducers, and then root reducer. Just like that. So now we have our root reducer imported right here. Okay, and remember, root reducer is simply combining our different reducers. So we'll also add all the reducer in here later on, but for now we just want something simple so that we can create the store. Right now we are successfully creating the store, and what remains is to make our application aware of this store. And for that we will use our React Redux library. So I'll import something from the React Redux library, which is a provider component. So I'll say import provider, and this is from the React Redux library. Okay, as I told you earlier, React Redux is acting as a binding layer of our React library and our Redux library. So this is a component, and we can wrap our app using this component right here. So I can say provider, and we need a closing tag. Okay, there we go. I move this app in here just to wrap it inside the provider component, and then I can indent nicely just like that. For our application to be aware of our store, we need to pass this store as a prop inside our provider component. So right here, I'll set the store to be equal to store. And that's it. That is how we set up React and Redux in our application. And now in the next section, I want us to try and create a new to-do in the database. So we'll talk about action creators and we'll talk more about reducers. Okay, but for now we can check if our application still works without errors. I'll check if it's compiled, and we have an error here, React Redux. So we need to wrap this one inside quotes. Yep. And let's see if we have any other error. And oops, combined reducer is not defined. So we made a mess again. So let me fix this real quick. I'll come to the root reducer. This is supposed to be combined reducers. So these are just typos. Make sure that you don't have these errors in your application. Okay, I hope everything is fine now. So our application still works. I can hit F12 to see if there are any errors in the console or warnings. So our console is clean and our application is working. So in the next section, let's see how we can add a to-do in the database. So in the last section, we were able to integrate Redux in our React app. And in this section, I want us to try and add a new to-do to the database. And to do that, we'll be working with our add to-do component here. And we'll try to read the values that we enter in our text field. we'll make use of useState hook. So at the top here we can import useState from React library. Okay, so useState, and then at the bottom here we can set up some default state, and what we can say is useState. We invoke it and pass an object in here. Our to-do will contain a name, and we can set the name to be an empty string, and also we'll have is complete, which is Boolean, and by default it will be false. So by default a to-do will not be complete. So for now we'll just have this default state, and I'll show you how we'll add the date. Okay, and this useState hook will return an array, and we can destructure some properties from that array. So I can say const an array. We will have a to-do which will represent this object or our to-do, and then we will have set to-do, which is a method for updating our to-do. Okay, so now we can make use of this 2 at the bottom here, and I should include an equal sign here. Okay, first of all I'll set a value which will be equal to to-do dot name. So this to-do dot name, an empty string, so this is the default, and then we will use an onChange event to update our value. So we can say onChange, which will be equal to, I include an object here, and I pass a function which accepts E for event, and then this will be an arrow function, and we can now call our set to do right here to update our to-do state. Okay, so I'll call this one, pass an object. I spread the properties of our to-do using the spread operator, so 3 dots and then to do, and then what I want us to update is the name. So right here I use a comma, and then I set the name to be e.target.value. So every time we type on that input field, our name will be updated to that particular value. And another thing that we can do is to set a date. So right here we can set the date to be equal to new date. And yeah, that's about the onChange. And once we click the submit button, we should include an onSubmit event at our form here. Okay, so that we run a handler function. So right here at our form tag I can include an onSubmit event, and this will run the handle submit function. So handle submit, just like that. Currently we don't have this function, so we can create it at the top here. So just at the top of our return statement here, we can create a function const handle submit, which will accept event, and then in here we can do something. The first thing that we will do is to prevent the page from refreshing when submitting the form by saying e.prevent default, and then we invoke this just like that. And then in here we can take the updated value of our to-do and log it to the console. So right here I can say console.log to do, and then after we log this to the console, we can reset our values for the form. So we can say set to do to be the default values here, name to be an empty string, and the is complete to be false, and then I can include a comma here. And I'm not sure why this is bringing an issue. I'm not sure. Okay, this is supposed to be an arrow function right here, that way. So we are preventing the page from reloading, we are logging the to do to the console, and then we are resetting our to do. So let's try and see if we can log a to do to the console. So I'll come to the browser here, and date is not defined, so I'll come back here and then scroll at the bottom. We should change this date to have a capital D. Yeah, this is a global method which is available to us, so it should be defined. Now when I come back after the refresh, these errors should disappear. Okay, the value here, we should include this bracket so that it's not a string. We are trying to read this name. Yeah, it should be this way. We include these curly brackets so that we can read this to do dot name. Not this one, but for right here, to do dot name. So yeah, and now let's try to create a to do here, maybe new to do. When we submit, we should get an output right here. So send, our form clears, and when I check my console, we have a date for our to do, we have is complete, and we have the name of our to do, which is new to do. Perfect. So we are able to get our to do. So what we will be doing is that we will be dispatching an action creator right here, okay, and then passing the to do to that action creator. So first of all, we need to create an action creator, and we'll do that inside our store folder. So I can expand this, and then I'll create a new folder inside the store folder called actions, and then inside the action folder I'll create a new file called to do actions, and this is where we'll have all our action creators for our to-dos. Press enter, and now in here is where we are going to create an action creator for adding a new to-do. Now before we do this, I need you to install a library which is Axios. So just run this in your terminal, npm I Axios, npm I Axios, and hit enter to install Axios in your application. I have already installed, and I'm assuming you already know how to install modules or libraries in your application. Okay, install Axios because we'll need it in this file, and then in your SLC folder you'll create a new folder called API. Okay, so this API folder, and then you create an index.js file inside the API folder, and what you will do is that you'll create a constant which is a URL and set it to this string http localhost 5000 /API, and this is trying to hit our backend endpoint or our backend API. Okay, and you also make sure that you export it because we'll also need this one in this particular file to do actions.js. So in this file, the first thing that you will do is to import Axios, assuming that you have already installed it. So import Axios from Axios, and we'll use Axios to perform HTTP requests. So you import Axios, and then you import the URL which is for our endpoint URL, and this is from the API folder. Okay, so I'll say stroke, and then we can access the API folder right here, and this should access our URL because inside the API folder we only have index.js and we don't need to include anything else at the front. Now that we have Axios and the URL imported, at the bottom here we can create an action creator for adding a new to do. So we'll say something like export const add to do. Now this is the name of our action creator, will be equal to, right here we'll be receiving a to do from our add to do component, so we can pass that to do right here, and we set this one to be an arrow function, and we can do something in here. So remember earlier we configured ReduxDunk, which is a middleware in our application. And ReduxDunk, what it does, it allows us to return a function inside our action creator. So right here we can return a function. So return an arrow function. And this arrow function will have access to these parameters, dispatch. And this dispatch simply continues the dispatch of our actions, and we'll also have access to get state, and we can use this get state to read our application state from the Redux store in case we need it. So at this point in here we can be able to perform an async action using Axios, and this is why we used ReduxDunk in this application. If we don't have ReduxDunk, we wouldn't be able to return a function in here, and if we tried, we'll get an error. Okay, so right here what we can do is to use Axios and use the post method to post a new resource to the database. I can include this on a new line to clearly read it, and then the first parameter is our URL, and we have imported the URL here. And what I'll do is that I'll use the backtick so that I can read this URL and include something in front of it, okay, or simply merge a string. So use some backticks and then use the $sign and the curly brackets. We read our URL, and at the front here we can include stroke to-dos. And now we are tapping on our to-dos API. Again, if you don't know how we created this to-dos API, make sure you check out the other videos in this particular playlist or this particular series. Okay, so this is the first parameter of our post method, the endpoint, and then the second parameter is our to-do. So you can simply say to-do. For this to-do, we can also include an author and a UID, and I'll show you how we'll do that once we add authentication in our application. But for now, this is good enough. So this is an async action. It will take some time to process. So we can tap a .then method at the end here. So we can say .then, and our response which we will get is the to-do that we just created. So we can access this to-do and do something with it. And what we will do is that we will simply dispatch an action. We will continue the dispatch. So dispatch, I invoke this, pass an object here, and the type of our dispatch right here is add to do. And then we can also include the to do that we just got from the backend. So just a quick recap. ReduxDunk allows us to return a function in here. So we halt the dispatch, and then we perform an async action using Axios. We post a new to do using the post method, which accepts the first parameter as the endpoint, and then the second parameter as the body of our request or our to do. Okay, and then we tap a .then method. Since this is an async action, we get a to do as a response, and we continue the dispatch here, and the type of our action is add to do. We can be able to access this add to do from our reducers and be able to update state accordingly depending on the argument. And in case of an error, we can catch that error. So right here we can also tap .catch. We have access to the error object. We set an arrow function, and we can log this error to the console. So console.log error.response, just like that. Now this is our action creator for adding a new to do, and to dispatch this to do from our add to do component, we need to make use of a Redux hook. Initially we used to do some crazy stuff at the bottom here, map state to props and some other crazy things, but with Redux hook it is much easier to now dispatch an action from this particular file. So what I'll do is that I'll import use dispatch, which is a Redux hook, from Redux library. So right here I'll say import ID structure use dispatch, and this will be from React Redux library. Sorry, I had said Redux library, but it's from React Redux. Okay, so yeah, now we can use this hook at the bottom here. Just right here I'll create a constant, call it dispatch, and I'll set it to be equal to use dispatch hook, and I need to invoke our hook here, just like that. Now I can make use of this dispatch. So instead of logging a to-do to the console, we will dispatch an action creator. Okay, so right here we'll say dispatch, we invoke it, and we pass an action creator in here, which is our add to do action creator. So what we can do is to import this action creator in this file. So I'll come at the top, and then I'll import that add to do in here. So I'll say import ID structure add to do action creator, and this will come from the store actions. So right now we are inside the to-dos folder. We need to get out of these components, go to the store. Okay, that's a long way to go. Okay, let's do this. So right here double dots, and then another double dots, and from here we can access the store, and then we can access our actions, and then we can now access our to-do actions. Perfecto. So now we can dispatch this add to do action creator right here. Okay, right here we dispatch add to do, we invoke it, and we pass our to do, this one right here, in here. So let me create some spacing so you can see what is happening. So now let me take you through the series of events that are happening. When we type something to the field, we hit submit. This on submit event will be fired. We run our handle submit function, which is this one right here. We prevent the default action, and then we dispatch an action creator, which is add to do, and we pass our to do in there, and then we reset our form. So this add to do action creator will receive that to do, which is this one, and then in here, with the help of Redux Dunk, we can post the dispatch, perform an async action using axios.post. The URL here is the endpoint. We pass our to do to the body of the request, and when this is received on the backend, it will be added to the database, and then we get a response, which is the to do that was added to the database right here. We continue the dispatch, and now we can update our state in our reducers using this information, the type of add to do and the to do. In case of an error, we catch the error and log it to the console. Now the last step that we can perform is to update the state, and we do this in our to do reducer. So right here, initially we just returned the state, but instead of doing this, we can check the action types and then update the state according to the action that we performed. So for now, I'll remove this one, and then we use a switch statement to switch through the action types. And then right here, we'll just say action dot type. We include different cases, and the case right now is for adding a new to do. So right here, add underscore to do, and this must be the same as this one. Okay, if you have a typo, some things won't work as we want them to. And then for our add to do, we can be able now here to return the updated state. So we can say return. We want to return an array of our to-dos. So right here we can return an array, we spread our different to-dos available in the state, and then we add our new to-do which we are receiving. Okay, so here we should have a full colon so that that error disappear. So right here, what I'll say is action. We will have a property called data, and then we can access the to-do, and then I spread the state, so we add it inside the state. So yeah, just like that. So this is the case for adding a new to-do, and we should also have a default case. So right here we can say default full colon, we simply return the state. So return state. I'll save this file, and at this point we can test our application, but we need to have our backend server running, okay, because we are trying to access our backend when we perform this action using this URL. So I'll come to my folder here where we have our man application. I open the backend folder, and then at the path hit cmd, and we run our backend using nodemon. Now our backend is successfully running, server running on port 5000 and Mongo connection established. So we can go to the browser, and yeah, we have an error here. I guess it haven't completely updated. It shouldn't display an error. So I'll refresh this one manually and see if everything will go along. So yeah, here we are. This is our application. We have added logic for our form here, and we want to see if we can add a to-do to the database. So first of all, I'll come to my database and confirm that it is empty. So collections here, and retrieving collections. We have our to-do database, and users are empty. We don't have anything actually. Okay, so let's try and add a to-do. So right here I'll enter new to-do, hit submit. We get undefined here from to-do actions, but let's check our database and see if we get something. I need to refresh. I'll hit refresh here, and now we have to-dos here. When I check our to-dos, loading documents, perfect. So you can see that we are adding a to-do to the database. Name new to-do is complete false, date, and this is awesome. We can add a new to-do to our database, and that I think meets the goal of this section. Now in the next section, we can see how we can read those to-dos from the database. So in the last section, we were able to use our form to add a new to-do to the database. And in this section, I want us to see how we can get that data from the database and add it to our application state. But before we do that, we made a mistake on our to-do reducer, and I want us to correct that mistake, and then we'll continue with this section. So I'll come to my code editor here, and this is where we made a mistake. We said action.data.todo, but in our action we don't have a property called data. If I come to do actions.js, you'll see that we are dispatching an action which will have a type and to do. So the properties that we have is action.type and action.todo. We don't have data. So what is supposed to be here is action.todo. And then inside our to-do is where we'll have a property called data. So yeah, that's it, and we can verify this by logging our action to the console. So just before our return statement, we can say console.log, and we log our action in here. So when we add a new to-do, we should be able to log our action to the console. So I'll come back to the app and manually refresh it just to make sure it have refreshed. I'll add a dummy to-do, new to-do, submit, and it should log to the console here. Yeah, there we go. So you can see we have an action which will have a property called type and another property called to do. And when I expand this one, you'll see our to do have more properties, and one of them is data, and the data carries the details of our to do. Perfect. Now you understand why we are doing action.do.data. So I'll remove this, and now we can figure out how we can get the data from the backend and include it in our application state. So we'll start by creating an action creator called get-to-dos, and we'll use this action creator to get our data from the backend. So right here, just like we did with our add to do action creator, I will export a function called get-to-dos. It will be an arrow function, and it will not be receiving any data in here. And then in here is where we will return a function with the help of reduxdunc, and then we'll use Axios to get our to-dos. So I'll simply copy what we have here just to make our work easier and paste it in here. And we can customize this to fit our needs. We won't be needing the state in this one. And then we'll use a method called get instead of post. We pass in the URL for our endpoint, which is this one, and we don't have any data that we are sending to the backend. What we get back after this process is our to-dos, an array of our to-dos. So we tap a dot then, and then we get our to-dos, and then we continue the dispatch here. Type will be get to-dos. And then we pass our to-dos so that we can access it in our reducers and update the state accordingly. In case of an error, we catch it. So now I'll come to the to-do reducer. We include a case for get to-dos. A full colon at the end here, and then we return action dot to-dos dot data, just like that. Now this will properly update our state with the to-dos array. Okay, but now we need to figure out a way of dispatching this action creator from our UI. For our add to do, it was super simple. We had a submit button. Okay, when we click the submit button, we called a handler, and in that handler function is where we dispatched add to do. So how will we do that in get to dos? I'll come to our components folder, go to to dos, and then list to dos component. And we will use a hook available in React called useEffect, and this useEffect hook will be called every time our component renders, and once it is called, we'll be able to dispatch our action creator from there. So let's come at the top here and import useEffect from React. And we'll also need the useDispatch hook from React Redux so that we can dispatch our action creator. So right here, I'll also import useDispatch, and this will be coming from React Redux library. And another thing that we will need from React Redux library is the use selector hook. So right here I'll also import use selector, and this hook will enable us to select a piece of state from the Redux store. And we need to also import our action creator from todoactions.js. So at the bottom here, let's import our action creator, which is get to-dos. So this will be coming from the store. I go one level up, another level up, I go to the store, and then I access our actions, and then I go to the to-do actions. Okay, so to-do actions here. Now let's make use of these imports. So I'll come at the bottom here and I'll set a constant called dispatch, which will be equal to use dispatch, and I invoke that hook. And then we can select the state from the Redux store. So I can set the state const state will be equal to use state. We invoke this hook, and then right here we'll pass an arrow function which will have access to the state. Okay, and this is the state from the Redux store, and we can return this state just like this, just like that. So this state will be equal to this state which is being returned, and we can log this state to the console. So right here I can say console.log state. Later on I will show you how we will select the to-dos state directory so that we can make use of it in this component. But for now, this is good enough to see whether we are getting our to-dos from the backend and adding them to the application state. Now the last thing that remains is to dispatch our get to-dos, and we will do that by calling the use effect hook just right here. So I'll say use effect, invoke this hook, and in here I can pass an arrow function which will be called when the application renders. Okay, and right here we can use the dispatch, invoke it, and then we call our get to dos action creator and also invoke it. This is dispatch. Now this dispatch will be called when our component renders, because use effect will also be called when our component renders, and we'll be able to log the state to the console. So we can go to our app and see whether we are logging the state to the console and whether we are getting our to-dos in our state. Okay, so I am getting an error of use state is not defined. So I made a typo. This is not supposed to be use state, it is supposed to be use selector. Okay, sorry for that. This is the hook that we use to select the state from our Redux store, and we imported it at the top here from React Redux. So it is not use state, it is use selector. Our application is successfully running. I'll open the console to see whether state is being logged to the console, and I can already see that we have an error, and the error is saying failed to load resource. The server responded with a status of 4.1 unauthorized, and this is because we cannot access this endpoint. Okay, we can't get our to-dos from these endpoints, and the reason is because we had protected our backend with authentication. So how we can resolve this for now is by going to our backend code and make some changes so that we can be able to access it, and then later on we will make it private again when we get to authentication section of our application. So I'll come to my backend right here, I'll stop the server, and I'll open the code with Visual Studio Code. So if you don't know how we created the backend, I recommend you go to my channel, check the other videos in this series, and you'll see how we came up with our backend. We created the to-dos API and also the auth APIs. Okay, so here is our get API endpoint, and you can see that we had protected it with auth, unlike our other API endpoints. So that's why we were able to post a to-do to the backend, but we are not being able to get them from the backend. So we need to modify this for now, but later on we'll come and add it back. Also, that means that we don't have a user, so I'll remove the user, and I can comment this one out because we'll need it later on. Okay, so at this point we should now be able to get our to-dos from this endpoint. So now I'll close this file. Actually, I'll close the entire VS Code. That's what I meant. And then I'll rerun my backend using NodeMon. Now our backend is up and running, and I refresh the application so that we can see whether our to-dos will be added to the application state. So I refresh here, and perfect, we have these to-dos, and it's being loaded on and on and on and on. We don't want this behavior. We don't want this behavior at all. So to stop this behavior, we can come to our code, and in our use effect we can add a comma, and right here we can add some options. Okay, so we want this use effect to load the first time, and then to prevent the reload we will use a dispatch here. Okay, so it will load again when we have a dispatch of our to-dos. Okay, so it won't keep on loading and loading and loading. It will load the first time, and then the next time it will load is when dispatch changes. So we can do something like this. Okay, so let's see if this will fix that issue. And you'll see that it loaded the first time, but it is not loading again until this dispatch changes, and this dispatch is called a dependency. Okay, we'll learn more about this later on, but for now let's see what we have in our to-dos. I'll expand the to-dos here, and you'll see that we have this property called to-dos, and it's an array of two to-dos which are available in our database. And this property is here because in our root reducer, so if I can come to the root reducer here, we added this property to-dos in our root reducer, and we set it to to-do reducer, which is updating our to-dos state. So this to-dos is the one that is appearing just right here. And now we can directly access this piece of state from the store, just like this. So instead of loading the entire state right here in our list to-dos, we can set a constant to be equal to to-dos, and then we use selector, we get the entire state, but right now we select the to-dos state only. Okay, so later on we'll be having even the auth state, but we only want to select the to-dos only. And now I can log the to-dos to the console. Okay, which is an array of those to-dos. So now I can come back here, and we have an error, state is not defined, line 23. I think we just changed that, so this should resolve. Now you can see that we are getting an array of our to-dos directory. Okay, now in the next section I'll show you how we can map through these to-dos and display them on the screen. Okay, in the last section we were able to get our data from the database and included it in our application state in form of an array. So this is very awesome because in this section I want us to take this data from the state and display it on our UI. And before we get started, I want you to install another library which will help us to format the dates. So you can see this is the timestamp of our date, and it is hard to read in this form. So I want it to be in a much more readable form, just like this one, and Moment will help us to do that. So just go to your terminal and install Moment, and you can see I have already installed mine. Just run npm I moment, and that should install Moment in your application. Once Moment is installed, now you can go back to your code editor, and we are still in the todos.jsx component, and this is how we are getting our to-dos from the state. So we use the use selector hook from React Redux. We have access to state, and we specifically get to-dos from the state. Okay, what we want to do is to conditionally render our to-do component depending on whether we have to-dos or not. And also we can conditionally render this this title right here. Okay, so let's start with the title. I remove this one, and we can do something like this. We can check the length of our to-dos. So you can say I'll include these brackets because we are writing JavaScript code in here, and then we can say to-dos dot length. So this will get the length of our array. Okay, right now we have 2 to-dos in our array, so the length will be 2. So if the length is greater than 0, we use this operator. Okay, if this is true, we will display the title that we had there, the to-dos. Else we will display this message, no to-dos yet. Okay, so how this operator is working is, if this is true, if this check is true, we will have the to-dos. That means that we have to-dos in our array. Else we will display this one. Okay, and that's all that we have for the title. And then we don't need to press multiple to do here, so I remove that. All we need to do is to use an array method called map. Okay, so we'll do something like this. I include these brackets because we are writing JavaScript code inside our JSX. I say to-dos end. So this will basically check whether we have to-dos or not. If we have to-dos, we will continue with whatever we are doing next. Okay, else this process will just be terminated. Okay, so if we have the to-dos, then we will do this to-dos dot map, and this is an array method which will help us to loop over our to-dos and display each to-do at a time. So when we map, we will get each to-do at a time. So in here we are using an arrow function, and then we can do something in here. Okay, we can include a return statement, and what we will return is this particular component. Okay, so if we have 2 to-dos, this component will be displayed twice. Okay, and for us to display the details of that particular to-do, we need to pass the properties of each of the to-do in this particular component. So right here I'll just use a break so that we can clearly see what we are doing here. And the first thing that we can pass is our entire to-do. So right here you can say to-do will be equal to to-do, and we can be able to read the properties of that to-do in this particular component. And then we also need to have a key. So key, and key must be unique, so we can make use of the to-do ID as a key. So right here we'll say to-do dot underscore ID. So if I come to the browser here and check our ID, you'll see it have an underscore ID. Okay, and this ID is unique and it was auto generated by our MongoDB. Okay, so you don't need to worry about how this ID came along. So there we go. Now we have a to do and we have a key. Perfect. And these are the two props that we need so that we can display our to do in the UI. Now at this point we are done with the list to do's component, and the next thing that I want us to do is to jump to this particular component, our to do component, and do some changes. So I'll go to the to do component here, and at this point where we are creating our to do component, we can receive that to do that we passed as a prop right here. Okay, so this to do is the one that we passed here. Okay, this one. So we are passing it as a prop, and we can take it from the prop right here. So I am doing a destructuring right here, okay, using these brackets, and we get our to do. And now we can use this to do and read its property and display it on the UI. So instead of learn React, we can do something like this, to do dot name. So this is one of the property. This is supposed to be a small cap, to do dot name, and this will give the name of our to do. And then for the author, currently we don't have an author for our to do. When we add authentication, we'll come and fix this. But for our date, we do have a date. Okay, so right here we can say added, and then I use the curly brackets here because it's JavaScript, and right here is where we are going to use moment. Okay, and the moment will help us to format our dates. So the first thing that we need to do is to import moment at the very top. So right here I'll import moment, from moment, just like that, and then I can use it here, moment. We invoke it, and in here we pass the timestamp of our to do, which will be available in to do dot date. And then at the end we include a method from now. And there are various ways that you can format the dates in moment, and you can check its documentation by going here and searching for moment. Okay, moment.js, and you can see the different methods which you can use in moment. So we have .calendar, and this is the one that we just used, from now. We have from now. Yeah, there are a lot of them. So depending on how you want to display your date, you can come to moment and check what is included in its documentation. Okay, perfect. Now this date will correctly display. Another thing that we can do is to conditionally render our buttons depending on whether a to-do is complete or not, and also we can conditionally render our name depending on whether a to-do is complete or not. So what we will do at this point is to add some styling at the top here, where we had the make style hook. So we can add a few styles so that we can conditionally render depending on whether a to-do is complete or not. So right here you can say is complete, and this will help us to change the color of our button, and I'll set the color here to green. And then I can include a comma, and I'll include checked. So if it is a to-do is checked, we can change the text decoration. And I'll include this style, line hyphen through. Okay, now to make use of this, we can come right here and check whether a to-do is complete or not. So I'll use the curly brackets, and we have a property called is complete. So to-do dot is complete. If a to-do is complete, then we want to render a particular text, which is this one right here. So if it's complete, we want to render this. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll just include a spacing here, select this one and move it at the top, and I should wrap it inside these brackets like that. I remove this spacing. So if to do is complete, we will display this component, which is a typography to do.name. Else we will display this component. I'll include the brackets. So what I'll do, I'll just copy this one and paste it in here. Now the difference is in the styling. We want the first one here to have a line through, because that to do is complete. So what we can do is to include a prop here called class name, which will be equal to this is supposed to be this way. So we'll have a class name which will be equal to classes dot checked, and this is the styling that we just added here. So this name will have a line through, else we will display this component at our typography here, but it won't have a line through. Okay, the next one is to conditionally render our button, the check circle button. So we will do a similar thing. To do dot is complete. We use our question mark here, and then we display our first component, which is this one. I'll copy it. I'll actually cut it and paste it here. Else I include a full colon. We will display a similar component. I'll copy that and paste it here, but the difference will be in our color, and we included a style for the color, which is this one, is complete color green. So to do is complete. If a to do is complete, we display this, else it is not complete, so we display this. So this is the point where a to do is complete, so we should include our styling in this button. Actually it's our check circle we need to style. So right here I'll say class name, and I'll set it to classes.isComplete. So just like that, if I save, Prettier will auto format my code. Yeah, and I hope you have understood this. If a to do is complete, we will have a green check circle, else it will be grayed out, and then we'll also have this name properly formatted. And this is how we can dynamically display our to do. So for now, I think we have achieved our goal. All we need to do is to run our application and test it out and see whether we are correctly displaying our to-dos. So I restart my development server right here. So npm start. So you can see our application is loading, and currently we have no to-dos yet. When the to-dos loads, the title changes, and then we have our to-dos listed at the bottom here. So perfect. You can see now we have new to-do. This is from the database, and then added 20 hours ago. Then we have this one, new to do. So yeah, and we can try to see if our is complete functionality is working. So we can go to the database and change the status of one of our to do. So I have my database here. Okay, let it load. So right here we have all our to do set as false. So for our new to do here, the first one, we can change the value to true so that we see whether it will change to something else. So right here I can set it to true and update. It have updated. When I come back, we don't see the changes immediately, but we need to hit refresh. And you see now this is green because the status of our to do have changed and we have a line through. So our display is working perfectly, but for the other until we add authentication is when we'll come and display it correctly. Now I want to show you something. If I add another to do, another one like DJ Khaled, I submit, it should appear right here, and there we go, another one. Yes, and it's a few seconds ago. So this is happening because we are correctly updating our state when adding a new to do. So if we come to our reducer to do reducer, you'll see that when we are adding a new to do, we took the existing to do's, which is this one, we spread them and add the new to do to the state, and once it's added to the state, it can correctly be displayed on our UI. Okay, so that's why we did this. Okay, perfect, and I hope now you understand why. Now in the next section I want us to see how we can update a to do. Okay, so far we can be able to add a to do to the database and also fetch that to do and display it on the screen. Now in this section I want us to see how we can edit a to do, and this will be a tricky one because we'll be using the same form for adding a to do to edit a to do. So when we click this edit button, I want us to populate our form here with the data of our to do, and then we will need to figure out how we can differentiate whether we are adding a new to do or we are updating a to do. But don't worry, I'll try to go step by step so that you understand everything, and I am hoping everything will work out. Okay, so we will start by creating an action creator for editing a to do. So let's go to our code editor and open the to do actions. Now at the bottom here is where we can create an action creator for editing a to do. What I'll do is that I'll just copy this one, the whole of this, copy, come at the bottom and paste it here, and then we can customize it to fit the update to do action creator. So here we'll say export const update to do, and then right here we will receive an updated to do, and also we will need to have an ID of that to do. So we'll also have an ID, and then we will return dispatch, and I don't think we'll be using get state in this one. And then right here we'll have Axios, and the method that we will use is put, and then we tap our endpoint. So we will have URL stroke to do's, and then for updating a to do we'll also need to pass the ID of the to do that we are trying to update. So right here I'll say stroke, I use the $sign and the curly brackets, and then I pass this ID of the to do that we are trying to update. So I press the ID there. So now this will be the endpoint for updating a to do, and then right here we will include the data of our to do, which is the updated to do. Updated to do. Okay, and what we will get back is a to do, and then the dispatch will have a type of updated to do or update to do. So this is an action. We can say update to do, and we can read the data of our to do on our reducers and update the state accordingly. Okay, so this to do will be different from this one, and that is because the action type will be update to do and not add to do. So don't worry about the similarity here, it won't affect our operation. And then in case of an error, we'll simply catch the error and log it to the console. And that's it. This is an action creator for updating our to do. Perfect. Now let's go to the next step of updating the state in our to do reducer. So just after our case here for adding a to do, we can include a case which will be update to do, and then at the end here a full colon, and we return something. So what I want us to do is to map through the to-dos that are available in our to-do reducer state. Okay, so this state is specifically for the to-do reducer, which is an array of our to-dos. So return, we read the state which contains an array of our to-dos. So we will say state.map, and then when we invoke this, we will loop through each to do. Okay, so remember this state contains an array of our to dos. Okay, and we can perform a check to see whether we are updating any to do in that particular array. So this is an arrow function, and we can do something in here, and what we will say is perform a check if to do dot underscore id, and this is from our state, and an already existing to do is equal to action dot to do dot data dot underscore id. Now this to do is the one that we have already updated in our action creator. Okay, so remember when we perform a then method here, this to do is the already updated to do, but it will have the same id as the to do that already exists in our state. And remember, what we are trying to do here is to update our state so that our UI can correctly also update. Okay, so if to do dot id underscore id is equal to action dot to do dot data dot underscore id, we can use the question mark here, which is our ternary operator. So if this is true, it means that we are trying to update a particular to do, or